Sound rage. If you've ever had the sudden, violent urge to flip a table because someone across the room is eating an apple too loudly, that reaction isn't entirely your fault. It was actually inherited from your parents. For years, people with sound rage, technically known as misophonia, were told they just needed more patience or to simply ignore it. Science says otherwise. Genetic markers near the TENM2 gene physically cross-wire auditory input directly into your fight-or-flight response. When you hear open-mouthed chewing or heavy breathing, your brain skips the annoyance phase and registers the sound as an immediate threat. Your nervous system dumps adrenaline, rapidly accelerating your heart rate and tensing your muscles in preparation for combat. You're experiencing an involuntary biological reflex dictated entirely by your DNA. So, the next time someone tells you to stop overreacting to their loud snacking, you can confidently inform them that your biology perceives them as a predator stalking its prey. Anxiety. You probably know someone who can let an embarrassing mistake go in 5 minutes, while you're still agonizing over an email typo you made 3 months ago. That inability to move on isn't all in your head. It's an inherited trait dictated by how fast your brain clears stress hormones. Your nervous system relies on specific enzymes to remove excess dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine after a stressful event. The COMT and SLC6A4 genes handle that critical cleanup process. Some people inherit versions of these genes that clear the chemicals almost instantly, resetting them back to calm. Others inherit significantly slower versions, leaving the stress hormones circulating in the prefrontal cortex long after the threat is gone. This lingering physiological response forces your brain to encode negative memories with extreme vividness. Higher baseline anxiety directly stems from neurological wiring that takes much longer to empty the chemicals out of your system. Caffeine metabolism. Some people can drink a double espresso at 10 p.m. and immediately fall into a deep, restful sleep. Meanwhile, half a can of Diet Coke makes you feel like your skeleton is vibrating. How long you stay wired is entirely controlled by your liver, namely the CYP1A2 gene. This gene produces the enzyme responsible for breaking down caffeine molecules. Fast metabolizers process the chemical so quickly that the stimulant effect completely vanishes in under an hour. Slow metabolizers produce much less of the enzyme, meaning a single caramel latte stays trapped in your bloodstream for up to 12 full hours. If a 2 p.m. coffee keeps you staring at the ceiling until dawn, you can blame your liver for holding your nervous system hostage while the fast metabolizers sleep soundly through the night. Spice tolerance. The guy at the taco stand drowning his food in ghost pepper sauce probably thinks he's tougher than the rest of us, but the truth is, his inherited pain receptors are simply built differently. The burning sensation you experience with spicy food is triggered by your TRPV1 receptors. Some people are born with highly sensitive receptors that scream in absolute agony at mild salsa, while others require concentrated capsaicin just to feel a passing tingle. Beyond just spice tolerance, your DNA also dictates how you experience actual flavors. The OR6A2 gene detects specific aldehyde chemicals, making fresh cilantro taste exactly like dish soap. Meanwhile, the TAS2R38 gene dictates how strongly you taste bitterness, explaining why supertasters find vegetables like broccoli physically repulsive. Eating is entirely subjective from the inside out. What tastes perfectly fine to one person is a biological assault on the inherited taste sensation of the person sitting right next to them. Chronotype. Society loves to tell you that waking up at 5 a.m. is just a matter of discipline, but for a huge portion of the population, attempting to become an early bird requires fighting a losing battle against your own DNA. Your internal circadian rhythm is strictly dictated by the PER1, PER2, and PER3 genes. These set the time your body naturally releases melatonin to put you to sleep and cortisol to wake you up. If your genes dictate a later schedule, forcing yourself awake before dawn means you're overriding your own biochemistry. Your body honestly thinks you are waking up in the middle of the night, and that's exactly what it feels like. The people bragging online about their healthy morning routines didn't unlock a secret productivity mindset. They just won the genetic lottery for early cortisol release and convinced the rest of us it was a moral virtue. Mosquito attraction. If you get eaten alive at every outdoor event while the person standing right next to you remains completely untouched, your immune system is genetically wired to sweat out a distinct scent that insects simply cannot resist. Regardless of what you've heard, mosquitoes don't care about your blood type. They track complex chemical compounds on your skin, and those compounds are specifically determined by your HLA genes. These critical immune system genes dictate the precise mixture of acids and bacteria you constantly excrete through your pores. Certain genetic combinations act as a biological cloaking device, hiding you from insects entirely. Other combinations broadcast your physical location to every mosquito within a 1-mile radius. No amount of commercial bug spray can permanently override the underlying unique scent your own DNA is pumping out into the air around you. You're stuck being their favorite meal. Pain tolerance. If your dentist thinks you're lying when you say the drill hurts after 3 shots of Novocaine, you probably inherited a mutation that makes you highly resistant to anesthesia. The MC1R gene is known for causing red hair and fair skin, but it also doubles as a pain regulator. This mutation actively alters how your central nervous system interacts with chemical pain blockers. People with this particular genetic profile require up to 20% more anesthesia to reach the same level of numbness as everyone else. Anesthesia resistance is only half the equation. Your everyday pain tolerance is controlled by the SCN9A gene, which regulates the sodium channels in your pain neurons. If you cry when you accidentally stub your toe, your pain channels are simply dialed up to maximum sensitivity by your own genetic code. You aren't being dramatic. Your nervous system's actively amplifying the signal. Procrastination. If you wait until the absolute last possible second to start a project, people assume you're just being lazy. But that procrastination may actually be entirely dictated by your inherited dopamine receptors. Your brain uses dopamine to evaluate the ultimate payoff of doing work. The DRD4 and TH genes regulate how those dopamine receptors function. People with highly efficient receptors can visualize a distant reward and feel properly motivated to start working immediately. If you have the mutant variations, your brain physically cannot register the value of a reward until the deadline is screaming in your face. The impending, undeniable panic finally triggers enough of a dopamine spike to force you into action. Your biology simply demands a full-blown, high-stress emergency to turn the engine on and get moving when you need to. Photic sneeze reflex. For a surprising number of people, stepping out of a dark movie theater into bright sunlight triggers an uncontrollable sneezing fit. A bizarre biological reflex that makes zero evolutionary sense until you look at their genetic wiring. Known scientifically as Achu syndrome, or autosomal dominant compelling helio-ophthalmic outburst, this dominant genetic trait originates from a tiny inherited mutation on chromosome 2. The optic nerve, which senses light, runs uncomfortably close to the trigeminal nerve, which controls your nose and face. When you walk outside, the sudden burst of brightness sends a powerful electrical signal rushing through the optic nerve. In people with this mutation, that signal leaks over to the trigeminal nerve. Your brain gets confused, assumes your nasal passage is irritated by dust, and forces you to sneeze. It's an electrical short circuit you inherited directly from a parent, and the only defense is keeping a Kleenex in your pocket. Sweet tooth. If you can't keep a pint of ice cream in your freezer for more than 24 hours without eating the entire thing, your liver is the one to blame. Your daily carbohydrate cravings are heavily managed by this organ, which acts as your body's built-in sugar monitor. It relies on the GLUT2 gene to build sensors that detect exactly how much glucose is entering your bloodstream. Once triggered, your liver uses the FGF21 gene to produce a specific hormone, shipping it straight to your brain with a clear message to stop eating. But if you carry a genetic mutation in this pathway, that entire communication system breaks down. The critical stop signal is severely blunted, leaving your body demanding significantly more sugar to reach baseline satisfaction. When that internal off switch is genetically missing, polishing off a whole sleeve of Girl Scout cookies is an entirely rational response. Empathy. We all have that one friend who's spectacularly bad at reading the room. Turns out, they might actually be missing the genetic receptors the rest of us inherited to process normal social cues. Oxytocin handles emotional bonding, interpersonal trust, and how well you accurately read facial expressions. But it's completely useless if your brain can't properly absorb it into your system. The OXTR gene builds the necessary receptors that bind to the hormone. People with a certain variant of this gene have significantly fewer active receptors, meaning they experience less of an emotional response during normal daily social interactions, and struggle to understand what other people are feeling. Their brain simply isn't wired to pick up the social signals everyone else is broadcasting. Cold tolerance. The guy casually strolling through a freezing snowstorm in gym shorts isn't totally crazy. He's physically generating heat through a genetic trait you simply don't have. Humans possess two distinct types of fat: white fat for storing energy and brown fat for generating heat. The UCP1 gene regulates a specialized protein that activates brown fat the second the environmental temperature drops. When triggered, this fat burns calories to warm your internal organs. Certain populations evolved specific mutations in this gene, giving them significantly more active brown fat. This means their internal metabolic engine naturally runs much hotter at all times. While you're bundled head to toe in heavy winter gear, their DNA has effectively turned their body into a walking furnace. Risk-taking. The person who considers bungee jumping off a bridge a relaxing way to spend a weekend afternoon isn't necessarily braver than you. They just inherited a gene that leaves their brain completely starved for stimulation. It comes down to a mutation in the DRD4 gene, which dictates how your brain responds to dopamine. While a normal brain gets a satisfying hit of reward from everyday activities, people with this variant have receptors that are incredibly sluggish and unresponsive. They are trapped in a constant state of neurological boredom. To this kind of brain, everyday life is simply too quiet. They require high-risk, dangerous situations to provide enough intense sensory input to force their stubborn receptors to finally fire. To them, leaping off a bridge isn't a desperate search for an adrenaline rush. It's just the necessary jolt they need to finally feel normal. Motion sickness. If glancing at a single text message in the backseat of an Uber makes you instantly nauseous, you can blame your ancestors for the faulty mechanics in your inner ear. Motion sickness happens when your eyes tell your brain you're sitting perfectly still, but the fluid in your inner ear detects active movement. The PRKG1 gene dictates exactly how strongly your central nervous system responds to this sensory conflict. Most people process the mismatch and easily ignore it. But if you have the mutant gene, your brain misinterprets the conflicting physical signals as a sign you've ingested a dangerous neurotoxin. It immediately triggers the nausea reflex to forcefully purge your stomach. Your DNA can't tell the difference between a bumpy car ride and eating a handful of poisonous berries, so it automatically assumes the worst is true. Facial expressions. If people constantly ask you why you look so angry when you're just sitting there minding your own business, feel free to tell them your resting bitch face is entirely hereditary. We naturally assume that our facial expressions are a learned behavior, picked up from watching our parents or reacting to our environment. Studies on people completely blind since birth shattered that psychological idea. Blind individuals make the exact same unique micro-expressions, a distinct lip purse, an eyebrow raise, a wrinkled nose, as their sighted relatives. The neuromuscular pathways dictating exactly how your face settles when you're deep in thought are hardwired into your system. You didn't learn to look annoyed. The baseline tension in your jaw and the resting position of your facial muscles are predetermined by genetic coding. Alcohol flush. If taking 3 sips of wine makes your face flush bright red and your heart beat like you just ran up a flight of stairs, your body is fundamentally failing a basic chemistry test. When you drink, your liver immediately converts the alcohol into a byproduct called acetaldehyde. A second enzyme is supposed to break that compound down into harmless water and acetate. The instructions for that second enzyme are provided by the ALDH2 gene. But if you inherit a specific mutation, that gene produces a defective version that barely works. Because the breakdown process stalls out, the acetaldehyde backs up into your bloodstream, dilating your blood vessels and causing a highly visible flush. Your body can't actually process the alcohol you drank, so it chooses to embarrass you instead. Athletic endurance. If the idea of waking up on a Saturday to run a half marathon sounds like fun to you, your muscle fibers are genetically wired differently than the rest of us who aren't completely out of our minds. Your athletic limits are set at the cellular level by the ACTN3 gene, which controls a protein found exclusively in fast-twitch muscle fibers. If your gene functions normally, you're naturally suited for sprinting or heavy weightlifting. Roughly 20% of people have a mutation that shuts this protein off. Without it, their bodies are forced to rely on slow-twitch muscle fibers instead. This ruins their explosive power, but accidentally gifts them with incredible cardiovascular endurance. Those people who voluntarily sign up for a distance race aren't clinically insane. They just have a genetic defect that makes jogging physically tolerable. Lactase tolerance. Most people assume that eating a slice of cheese or pouring milk on cereal is just a normal human behavior. But if you can do it without immediately regretting it, you're technically a genetic anomaly. All mammals produce lactase, the digestive enzyme required to break down milk, that is, when they are babies. The biological default is for the MCM6 gene to permanently shut down that production once you are completely weaned. For the vast majority of human history, drinking milk as an adult guaranteed severe digestive misery, as the undigested lactose hit the colon and fermented. But a random mutation appeared a few thousand years ago in cattle herding populations that physically broke the genetic off switch. This left the lactase enzyme permanently running. Lactose intolerance is not an allergy. It's the original factory setting of the human body. We all know our eye color, hair color, good looks, and the joy of going bald early all come from our parents. The weird part is how many other things did too, that you never would have guessed.